He is Mizzou-made. He is a figurehead at ESPN. It's Steve Peresman joining me on the Onto Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, a golf and tennis broadcaster. I also do volleyball. And this is the Onto Something podcast, where we tell stories of those hardworking individuals behind the scenes in sports media. Everybody has a story, and this is a platform to really understand the professional side of the person, but also the personal side as well. So we get a wholesome look at who Steve Peresman is. Steve, thanks so much for doing this. Really looking forward to this.
My pleasure, Bryan.
The idea as we start this off of not giving up, how does that notion apply to your life and your journey in sports media?
Well, it's funny. I think it goes all the way back to Missouri, where I went to school. I knew from the time I was 5 years old and went to a TV station for the first time, and I saw the sports department, which was amazing. That the sports anchor in the sports, and this was in a small town, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and I just remember saying, "That's what I'm going to do." I think that was so much fun. So, like, my father was a clothing salesman, and one of his clients was the news director at a local TV station. So he would bring me. He got me an internship in high school. I got to spend a week in high school at the ABC affiliate in Pittsburgh. I knew immediately that was definitely for me. And then during the summer, I would find a TV station just let me in the door, not paid, no credit, no anything, just working. And I worked with a lot of Pittsburgh people like Bob Pompiani. I don't know if you know him. Myron Cope of legend in Pittsburgh let me work on his radio show for a week. It was just I knew from the start. Then I went to Missouri, and I flunked Spanish twice. So and that was, you needed to get that to get a journalism degree. So I took journalism classes, but I graduated with a political science degree because my father said, "You're not going an extra semester because you flunked Spanish, but that was your fault." So you know how it goes. When you graduate, it's all about, just trying every door you could possibly do to get that first break. So I decided just not to give up. So my first job was at the NBC affiliate in Pittsburgh. I was a desk assistant, and I don't know if you know this story. There was a I think Pennsylvania Secretary of State who committed suicide at a news conference. Wow. So I was working the assignment desk that day. It was Bud Dwyer was the name of the guy. People can Google it. It's gruesome, yeah. But so I was answering the phone that day. I was worried, and we got like hundreds of calls, and they were split about 50%. How could you show something that terrible? And 50%, when are you going to show it again? So that gave me an indication of what people are like out there. So
it was go for it.
Oh, go ahead. No, I'm done.
I was going to say, going off, and did not mean to cut you off. The going off what you just said, and that idea of finding your own voice in media, and with things being so subjective, like you just said, there's half the people they want to see that more. There's those that don't. The process of you finding your voice and what works for you, what has that journey been like for you?
It was just, the thing is, when you're 22, you think you know everything. And now I'm in my 50s and I don't know very much at all. And I think that's the way. I've had people along the way, like when I was in Altoona, Pennsylvania, as a reporter producer. I remember like writing the newscast and thinking it was so great. And then we had one of the anchors, Brandon Brooks was his name. He worked there for a long time. Then he went to KYW as a radio guy in Philadelphia. But he was a great writer, and he helped me. And I was only there for like 9 or 10 months. But by the end of it, I was a much better writer. And I think that's the way you have to do. You just got to take whatever you can get from whatever person you're working with, because everybody, even if you don't like them, has something to offer. Have something some kind of tip, or you can observe, or even if you just, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do it that way. So, but yeah, I've learned from so many great people. I worked with, Sal Palantonio and Ed Werder and Andrea Kramer, and and just worked with them for a long, long time. And I know, and now I'm not in the field anymore. I don't work that, but keeping in touch with those guys is terrific. And you still catch up with them. We get together and remember the old days, that kind of thing. So it's great.
I take you as someone who's all about nostalgia and remembering what it was like back when you got started. The forefathers of sports media, and the women who paved the way as well. What is it about your brain that loves history, loves digging into being someone who's very nostalgic? Because that's sort of the vibe I feel from you, Steve.
Yeah. Well, I kind of always was a big fan of, like, I remember, like, my father would tell me stories about the 1960 Pittsburgh Pirates, or other people would talk, like, just being able to see that kind of thing and realizing that the first book I ever read was about Hank Aaron. I remember being like in, I don't know, first grade, and I snuck into the adult library and went in, and the first book, because it was alphabetical, Hank Aaron. So I'm reading this book. I'm thinking, this is the greatest thing ever. I'm reading an adult book. So, and it's always been that way. I always want to find out what's going on. I always want to look at the wires and see what the next story is. Or every night, what I enjoy most about this job is every night is different. You work one day and then the place clean. You don't, like, I could work on features, and I've done that. I'm much more fun with starting every day and just seeing what's happening, because you can react to it and help the shows do coverage.
Going off of what you said, and obviously all the people that you've learned, and all the different spaces and mediums of media that you've worked in, what is it like, the pride you feel in preserving the essence of what journalism is, and how you feel like you and your colleagues are sort of like the gatekeepers, and making sure that what you learned and how you've grown and what you've picked up from journalism continues on, and sort of a vehicle moving forward?
Well, the group I work with at ESPN is called the Universal News Group, and we kind of are, our thing is, we check scripts for television, we check radio, we work with the social people. Pretty much, you can do 100 posts and everything's fine, and you mess up one, and people think ESPN is slipping. So you really have to be careful. You have to admit when you make a mistake and correct it. I know my boss, David Kraft, is a big proponent of the corrections page. Nobody likes to put anything there, but if it's there, we have to. And again, we're the same ones who watch TV shows and, hey, that's not right. We'll call reporters and say, hey, you might want to change that, or you might have misspoken. But it's live television. You're going to make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, but we're trying to cut them down to a minimum. And also, we're trying to, like the most important thing I think that separates ESPN from other sports networks is the credibility and the accuracy. And once you don't have that, you don't have any. If you don't believe what you're saying, then they're not going to watch or listen or read or all the other things that ESPN does. I mean, there's 500 ways to get ESPN these days. When I started, there was one. I was there for the creation of ESPN Radio, ESPN2, everything that pops out. I remember for ESPN2, I was working with Dick Schaap and went to Moab, Utah, where Billy Crystal was doing City Slickers 2. And the gimmick was he was going to watch a playoff game. So we had this, we spent $1,000 to get a satellite dish taken to the middle of the desert. And he watched the game for like 10 minutes and said, I'm done. But the feature was great. It was the first night of ESPN. And I had to drive from Utah back to Colorado and feed it in. And then I watched it like anyone else. So it was fun.
I saw a tweet where you were talking about being in that car ride with Dick Schaap in Utah, and the conversations that you guys had. For those of us who were not in that car to listen to that chat, what would we have been privy to?
Well, I'm good friends with his son, Jeremy, and I've recounted it with him, but it was just, he was telling me stories about John Chancellor and David Brinkley, and he used to do the sports for NBC Nightly News, so he knew everybody. He told me a story and about he went with John Chancellor to this like Studio 54, which was like debauchery. Here these famous anchors, and it was just that was New York back in the 70s. So it was just fascinating. Like, we drove for I think 6 hours total, and it was just one of the best times I ever had.
What has not changed with ESPN since you've been there? Obviously, with technology, and like you said, there was one way to access media, and now there's so many different outlets to consume ESPN content. But since you've been there, what hasn't changed?
I just think the work ethic at ESPN, and you've probably heard this from a lot of different people, like when you go to I just came back from Bristol. I was in Bristol for a week, and I've worked in Bristol about 15 of my 30 years. But just everybody just works hard. Nobody thinks about, weekends, nights, the summer. You go on an August day in like August 20th, and nobody's working at New York, but in Bristol, the whole place is full. Everyone's buzzing. It's a Sunday afternoon in August when there's just like 12 baseball games, and that's about it, and maybe NFL training camp. But to us, it's like, it's a playground, and you can do whatever you want, and that has never changed. And also, I think people have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. I know when we first started, it was like, well, there was ABC, NBC, CBS, and we were like I worked Monday Night Football with I did NFL Countdown for a number of years, like 10 years. And that would be going to and at the beginning, it was ESPN was doing a little show around the ABC Monday Night Football. And they were like little condescending to people. And they were like, oh, we have to do we have to do something after the game for ESPN. And then things turned. So by the end, it was like, well, ESPN was pretty much running ABC. And that was unbelievable to me because I remember we would hate that. And also, I remember working on ESPN News back in the day when we would like request like somebody to stick around after a game to do it, and we could hear them. They didn't realize we could these guys like, hey, why do we have to do ESPN News? I'm like, we can hear you. So, but generally people work incredibly hard. Even like Woj works all the time. He's remarkable. I mean, you should if you could talk to him. I mean, he's an amazing guy because he works 24/7. I mean, there's not anything that goes on in the NBA that he doesn't know about, which is, obviously there's some downside in your life because you're constantly connected to your phone, but that's what he does to be the best in the business, which he is.
Woj has watched a couple of these conversations, and the hard work that you see from him. What is that like? I know you talked a little bit about it, but just those that don't really appreciate the amount of hours that this guy puts in and how he's able to do it. And you, Steve, are right there as well, able to see that firsthand.
Well, the amazing thing about Woj is that, Adam Schefter breaks news all day long and he's fantastic, but he doesn't usually write this story. We have, 32 NFL reporters. So say Schefter reports on it. He writes stuff for Sunday. I don't want to give the impression he doesn't write anything, but Woj, when he breaks a story, he immediately writes it. So, and then he also gets called to TV. Like he's on pretty much every show, and there's no off season now in the NBA. It's just remarkable how hard he works and how he knows what's going to happen. I kind of think that the GMs call him to make sure they're okay. He's okay with what they're doing.
Wow. What is he like outside of work? Maybe if you've had lunch with him and just getting to know him more.
He's very appreciative of the people working and understands it. And we were very big competitors when he worked for Yahoo. In fact, I remember like he blocked me for something. Like I guess we sent out something that our reporter and but then when he came to ESPN, it could not have been a better teammate. He's really been an outstanding guy to work with, as is Schefter, as is Passon, another tremendous guy who does and they like. These guys like to have they'll talk to us, they'll ask us questions. What do we think? Like it's kind of remarkable that they want to get our opinion. But I think the collaboration is what makes it special.
You have so many incredible talents there, as you just mentioned. And Steve Peresman is with me, coordinating news editor at ESPN. I'm Bryan Fenley. This is the On to Something podcast. Somebody who I really respect among so many of your colleagues is Neil Everett, a man with the ultimate class. How have you seen that unfold?
I just think that Neil is probably the best writer we have as an anchor. He's a tremendous writer, and that really pays off. And also his knowledge of pop culture, his I'm sure if you're a fan, you've seen them. He does music lyrics as kind of that's his shtick, but it's tremendous, and it's not forced. He really is passionate about that. He's passionate about Hawaii, where he worked for several years. He's passionate about Oregon, where he grew up. He's passionate, and when he comes in, he can be funny, but he can also be serious, and he can also do a really difficult story. He's the guy you'd want to do for a tough interview or a funny interview. So it's fantastic. But and away from work, he's one of the nicest people I ever met. I mean, I had some illness, and he came to my house and visited, which I thought was unbelievable. You don't get that very often from guys no. But he's tremendous.
He has an amazing heart, as do you, and that's one of the things that is able to be seen through his broadcasts, is that there's such an authenticity to him and so many that you work with. Steve Peresman is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. Here's an interesting question for you, Steve. The idea of everybody in this industry and the amount of importance we put on how we're viewed and how much time we think about how we need to be in being viewed, and the essence of how much time I guess to say it another way, Steve, how much time do you think in a business like this should we put stock into how we are viewed based upon what others and our colleagues think, at the same time listening to yourself?
I think you pointed out, like you've said that, and I know it. Like Twitter, when it came along, I was one of the first people at ESPN who were like, we better watch this because there's news being broken. Most of our guys weren't on at the time, but we were looking at it. That was a time I remember working on the desk when we did a story that Deadspin had, which had to go all the way up to the very top level. We're going to do a story crediting Deadspin, but it was they did some stories back in the day when they were serious journalists, so we ran it, and we credited them. But now we monitor Twitter all the time, and we're constantly looking for stuff. But the unfortunate part is sometimes you'll see something that's not accurate, or sometimes and you don't, you want to correct it. But do we take a story that we know is not true and amplify it by saying we know it's not true, but sometimes we don't say it's not true. We just have to sit back and and also there's also amount of that we get questions immediately after somebody tweets on. We have to check it out. I mean, there's no we want to be quick, but we want to be accurate, as I keep saying, more than anything. So, like, for instance, one of the things that the news desk does is we confirm deaths, and we only do deaths based on the team or the family. Yeah. So you see a bunch of source deaths. We never source death. I remember sitting when George Steinbrenner died. That was one, and we had, like, I was one putting out, we call them newswires. We have a system called EMPS, which is a way to alert the whole company, radio, television, everything, social, that we have a story. We're waiting until one of our reporters confirmed it, or the Yankees confirmed it, and finally put it out. But it was like an agonizing 10 minutes, and we're constantly getting called. Are we going with that? No, we're not. Hold on, we'll confirm. Because we've had, like I don't know if you remember, NBC once ran a thing that Joe DiMaggio died. It was like 5 years before Joe DiMaggio died. And that was our thing. Never screw up that badly. And thank goodness we have.
The idea of decision making in those moments, how challenging is it with all, you're probably being,
it's almost fun because you get a chance to that's your role. You get to, and again, you have to ask everybody. You can ask the people that you're working with. You ask your bosses, and I have several great bosses. My boss is David Kraft, and his boss is Maria Suarez. He used to be Jill Frederickson, who retired, and ultimately Norby Williamson, who, when I started, was the 11 o'clock sports center producer. So I would work on the assignment desk at the time, and we would work together. And I thought, boy, he's very sharp, not knowing that he would one day run the entire company. So,
what do you think about you as most sharp? And I know you're a humble guy, and this is probably, I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but what do you think is your best in what you offer to the company?
I think what I like to do is I don't mind working. When I'm working, I'm working. I'm not trying to be friends or anything. I have to focus on what I'm doing. And like I always tell people, I'd rather get a call like 2 hours before I start my shift that something's brewing than walk into a night.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. So I think when people see me, they know I'm gonna work very hard. I'm gonna try and be as accurate as possible. And the other thing I found out is you can't just tell people the news stuff. You have to know about their lives. So we get to know all the. I think people listen to you more when they know you on a personal level, more than just there's the guy who tells us what we can do and can't do. Like, find out what they're like. Stan Perrett and I. Stan's passionate about the Saints. Stan's passionate. Like, we talk about the other stuff, and then when naturally we have to talk about work, it's much easier than when you're just telling somebody, "Hey, this is the work thing you have to do," and you can't tell Stan what to do anyway. Because the best thing about Stan, and I worked with him for a long, long time back to our ESPN News days, is, he is a great writer, and he pays attention. We're blessed. Linda Cohn, another person who's fantastic, and Ashley Brewer is going to be a star. So we have a tremendous crew in Los Angeles.
That you do. How good is Stan Verrett at golf?
He's getting better. He's not ready for the senior tour, but from what I understand, he certainly works at it. And sometimes it goes well, and sometimes it doesn't. But I honestly think, and I've never talked to him about it, I think part of the reason he came to Los Angeles from Bristol is that he could golf more, because he golfs 9 months or 10 months a year here in LA, whereas in Bristol he could do it maybe 3 or 4 months.
What are you best at? So for Stan, maybe it's golf, but what are you best at outside of work?
I'm passionate about movies. I think if I had a chance, I would be a movie producer more than a sports producer. But it didn't work out that way. And again, I'm not the most creative guy in the world. I always look at myself as like I'm okay at that kind of stuff, but I'm not like we've had some really gifted people like I just running the company or working, and they have what they provide is like a spark of, like, we work with a guy named Michael Goldfarb. Remember that name? He's worked for TNT and invented some of the Shaq stuff that he does, and he constantly comes up with ideas. I like to more system ideas, like what will make our job easier. I'm not coming up with like the next big like creative idea, even though I sometimes do, but more often than not, I think my role is coming up with how can we make it quicker or more efficient or work better or make everyone happier. And that's what I'm always looking for.
In another universe, if you could obviously do what you're doing right now, but had the opportunity to be a movie producer, what's that script going to look like? What are you going to put out there?
One of my favorite movies, and I was just thinking about it, Hoosiers. I think there's probably another Hoosiers-like story out there that hasn't been before. Like, whenever I see stories like that, I think, why didn't anybody do that? And the thing that I like is the movies that stick more closely to the fact rather than the like based on a true story. I want it to be almost not a documentary, but a little bit more accurate than you would think. So.
Steve Peresman is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. I got one more question for you, Steve, as you mentioned in your conversations earlier about how when you work with a colleague and you get to know them on a personal level, it's that much more enjoyable and it makes life as doing business with somebody that much easier, which is why I love this setting, because we not only talk about your life in work, but also what you're like personally and your sense of who you are and the validation you get. How powerful is that in your work?
I think ESPN management has been very good as letting us know. Like they kind of, yes, of course we've had the layoffs, we've had just like anyone else, but a tremendous amount of people have been there 20, 30, 35 years. I don't know if you know about this, but Disney, the whole company, has this celebration after 20 years. You go to New York and they have like an awards banquet, and you see Bob Chapek or Bob Iger or whoever, and they come around and talk to everyone, and it's just a really joyous time. And the people they're honoring are the people that work. Like, you see incredible stories about like the security guard from KABC who's worked there 42 years. It's remarkable. And all the people kind of get validated and they get a little bit of, they get a little attention. They get to rub shoulders with not everybody's going to be the CEO or everything, but, everybody, I think, contributes in their own way, and they want to get recognized in their way. And I think they're very good at doing that here.
Well, Steve, you have contributed in so many ways at ESPN. It's an honor to have you on. And as someone who has been behind SportsCenter Top 10 and all of that, I feel like we hit upon maybe top 10 of your best plays or some of your best plays from a work standpoint, as we also learned about you personally. Steve Peresman, I'm Bryan Fenley. Steve, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciated the conversation.
It was a pleasure, Bryan. I look forward to seeing other interviews with other people. Thank you.